So next, we're going to start talking about filtering. You kind of heard me mention this earlier, is when we're taking a bunch of output and only grabbing basically what we needed out of it. So the best practice is to filter as far left as possible. So earlier, whenever we mentioned that it had a, some commandlets themselves have a TAC filter, or they have a TAC filter parameter. That's as far left as I think you're going to get when filtering. So basically what happens is, let's say the one I know of off the top of my head is getAdUser, and it has to have a TAC filter. So now you're going to take all your users that are in Active Directory, and you're only going to filter down to a subset of what you really need. If you wanted every user inside of Active Directory, you would use a TAC filter star. That'll get you everything you need. So, but most commandlets don't have a TAC filter. So what happens is you will take get service, for example. You're going to get service. It doesn't have a TAC filter. So you're going to send it across the pipeline and then filter that way because we have a where object commandlet. So let's see what this says. Yep. So back in the day, each commandlet has its own way to filter. Some have a dash filter, some don't. Some require another type of parameter that's going to filter it out. Say like get process. Get process doesn't technically have a way to filter, doesn't have a filtering parameter. But if you were to filter, or if you were to say get process TAC name and then do SV star, well, now you're filtering all the processes down to only the processes that start with SV. So if you wanted SVC host and all the other ones that begin with SV, right? So that's a way you can filter before you send it across the pipeline. So that's a way to filter as well. Get service, it's kind of like get process. It can only filter on the name. We just kind of talked about that. Get AD computer has its own filter, and you can actually filter on any attribute that you wish. There's different ways of doing it. Just know that you can. And if there's no way to filter as far left as possible, you can send it across the pipeline to the where object is at. Just know that the processing of doing so is you're going to take a little bit of a performance hit doing that. The caveat to that is if you, oh no, that's different. That's the select object. Never mind. So whenever you're doing your filtering, you have your different comparisons. We've seen some of these. We've seen the equals, which is TAC EQ. Now, inside the parentheses here, I have the symbols for what these letters are. Just know that these symbols can be used in certain languages. They cannot be used in PowerShell. I've tried using these before because of, I think, Bash or something. One of the other scripting languages I was tinkering with you could do that. It might have even been my, I think in Moloch, I used Moloch. It uses the symbols. PowerShell, you can't use the symbols. You have to use the letters. So GE greater than equal to, less than equal to. Now, if you put most of the time inside Windows, it is case insensitive, meaning it could be uppercase, lowercase, it doesn't matter. But if case does matter, you have to put a C in front of it. That'll kind of help narrow it down too. So if you wanted it to be equal to something, but it's case sensitive, you put a C. So CEQ is case sensitive equal to whatever. So that's kind of what these are talking about here. Just know in Linux, the comparisons as well, if you're inside PowerShell on Linux, it is case insensitive. So which is kind of different than what we're used to. We're used to being in Bash and it being case sensitive, where if you type something, it had to be the exact same case each and every time. It's not the case if you're running PowerShell on Linux, which I believe is a nice feature. All right, so you can stack your comparisons. You have your and or not. These are pretty much the same as everything else we've done in our cyber careers, right? A is going to match B or it's not, right? Both have to be true. A and B have to be true in order for something for the whole statement to be true. Or A or B can be true and the whole statement is true. If both of them are false, then the whole statement is false. With the and, if one of them is false, the whole statement is false. And then if you needed to reverse the true false of it, you can use the not. And then we also have these other string comparisons, the like. So when we're talking about string comparisons, you have to start using some like asterisks and your question marks and things like that. So it can start taking some of your regex, right? So you can start doing pattern matching whenever you start using like and not like and things like that. And of course, if it's case sensitive, or no, let me retract what I was saying. So if you're using the like and the likes, it's got to be similar. You can use a star, right? So I would use AD, get AD user, and then username like, and then I would put Aaron star. So it would grab all the users out of Active Directory with the name Aaron in it for me, right? Whether it's Aaron space whatever, Aaron space this guy, whatever, it would grab it. Match, on the other hand, is where you would use your regular expressions. This is where my username needs to match whatever pattern that I create with it. Or, you know, we're in security, we like IP addresses. We're trying to get machines with a certain IP address. You know, we've got this report or whatever, we're reading it in, grab all the numbers that match this pattern, and this pattern just so happens to be an IP address. I actually have an example of this that I'll show you. Yeah, I'm going to show you that, and then we'll talk about remote PowerShell. All right. Close that. Close that. Output, input, comparisons. All right. So here we go. We get service. We're doing our filtering on the right, but we're getting any status that is equal to running. And here we go. These are all our running processes. We could also just get it. We don't have to do the filter. We can get the status of running based on the property of it. Now this is interesting. So let's get all of our services where the object status is equal to running. So we want all of our running processes that had to be manually started. So this is kind of interesting. So for whatever reason, these services that are showing, they're running, but they don't auto run. Something had to start them. So now we can start thinking on a security standpoint, why were these started, right? You know, what actually starts the where'd it go? STD, yeah. What actually starts that service? Why does it start it? And I'll tell you right now, you really don't even need it running, but that's another subject. Okay, so now we're going to start talking about, so we can get processed where the name is not like PowerShell. We're going to filter, or we're going to sort the objects by the virtual memory in descending order. We're going to select the first 10 objects. So this is kind of like whenever you use top or last, not top, head, tail in bash. Well, we're going to select the first 10 or the last 10 or whatever. And we only want to look at the process name, the VM, the ID, and we're going to see, let me grab all that. And it did not work. Let's grab this. Oh, see, if we were in a physical class, you guys would have been telling me I didn't grab the whole thing. There we go. So I only grabbed the first 10. So the sum of the virtual memory that all my processes are running is that. I can't remember what that was supposed to prove, but it proves something. Oh, it's not like. So all of the processes that are not like my PowerShell stuff that's running. So everything but PowerShell. So what was the other one? Let me see here. Demo scripts. There's another one. Yeah, here we go. Edit. I actually clicked the wrong one, but this will work. So this is that same one. Hopefully you guys can read that. All right. So here I have, this is the one thing I didn't like about PowerShell ISE is it doesn't have word wrap. But basically I have this regex pattern here. And I got this from CyberChef, which is supposed to be a regex pattern that matches URLs and then IP patterns and then dates, things like that. But somewhere in here, yeah, I have all match. And so I'm selecting my string with the pattern of this, and it must match. So it's a little hard to read, not exactly like the examples, but know that whenever you use the word match, you're actually using regex. Is the important takeaway there. All right, so we're going to move on to remote PowerShell because I think this is super, super important. Remote power. So here's why I'm so infatuated with this is when I first got into IT, long time ago, I was working the help desk well, I technically started out as a classroom support guy, but whenever I moved over to help desk, we had this tool. It's called Altiris. Altiris was a client management software that we could manage all of our desktops. We all had physical desktops at this point. But the problem was when I needed to get information from a handful of computers, I had really no easy way of doing it. However, Altiris had a way that I could run simple commands remotely on all my machines to do certain things. I just fell in love with that feature. It was like the greatest thing ever. I could create this job that would run this command on 30 different machines at one time. Well, because of where I was working, it was with a government agency, and Altiris costed us money. And when DISA decided, hey, everybody is going to use SCCM, or maybe it was Guard Bureau, I don't know. Because I worked for an agency that actually worked for Guard Bureau. Guard Bureau came out and said, everybody, all states, all 50 of you, all 54 territories need to use SCCM. Well, I've grown to hate SCCM. It could do some of the things that Altiris could, but definitely not as fast. Altiris was instantaneous. It gave me that instant gratification. SCCM, you kind of got to wait, see what happens, see all that. But then I started learning about PowerShell remoting. Well, now I got my instant gratification back against multiple machines at one time. It's really, really great. So let's talk about it, and I'll show you some demos, and then we'll actually configure Linux to remote into Windows and vice versa, which I think is like the cream of today. It's the greatest thing. So, so back in the day, before there was actually WinRM in PowerShell remoting, so before version 3, each commandlet would handle its own remoting procedures. And this is where the dash computer name came from. So if you're ever on a machine, especially Windows, if you're on a Windows machine and you have a commandlet that has a dash computer name, it's probably PowerShell version 5 or earlier. PowerShell 6 and newer, they've gone away from that, and they've gone with PowerShell remoting. With version 7 came PowerShell remoting over SSH, which is wonderful. That was really, really nice. So now we can have Windows talking to Linux, Linux talking to Windows, and there's a lot of configuration set up, but we'll get to it. And then we have the remote PowerShell. So there's an open standard out there. It's called I forget what it's called off the top of my head, but Microsoft took it, tweaked it a little bit, and now calls it WinRM, essentially. WS management, that's what it is. So WS management, the way I understood it whenever I was doing the research, is it's an open standard that anybody can use for machine-to-machine management. So again, Windows took it, revamped it. Of course, they put their Microsoft stamp on it and called it WinRM. So PowerShell remoting, like we've talked about, similar to Telnet and SSH, which you can actually remote PowerShell over SSH now. So WS man. Yeah, WS management. That's what I was thinking of. If I'd have just clicked a few more. It uses this open protocol, and it kind of uses web services for the management. So you can use TLS. You can encrypt your connection with TLS. I've not done that, but it can be done. And it has certain ports that you can set your firewall to, which, yeah, WinRM, we talked about that. and you must configure WinRM on host machines. So all of our Windows 10 machines, Windows 8 machines, if you've got Windows 7 left, they all need to be, you need to turn WinRM on. It's not on by default. Server 2012 R2, I believe, is whenever it came out standard that it was enabled. WinRM was enabled by default. So you don't really have to worry anything about the servers, but it's the client machines that you have to turn it on. And I didn't add the notes here, but on the newer versions of PowerShell, so PowerShell 7, on Windows, Linux, and Mac, I mean, you need to make sure SSH is turned on if you're going to use PowerShell over SSH, which is probably going to be my preferred way of doing it, just for the simple fact that port 22 is generally open. SSH is already open on the Linux and the Macs. And I believe it is starting to become standard to be open on the newer versions of Windows. I know I didn't have to configure any SSH stuff on my Windows 10, and I'm running the 2004 version, which is the newest one. So I didn't have to do any configuration. So it seems to me to be the standard. So now I don't have to mess with my firewall rules. If it's already open, that's less firewall rules that I have to open. So one thing to remember when we are PowerShell remoting is whenever you get onto the other machine, so depending on how you remote in, if you're using the invoke-commandlet, what it's going to do is whatever command you're invoking is going to send that command to the remote machine. It's going to run that command. It's going to take a snapshot of whatever the output is supposed to be. So we're going to call that snapshot, we're going to call it a serialization. So it's going to serialize that output. It's going to bring it back, and it's going to deserialize it for us. So you're not getting, if I remember correctly, so you're not getting real-time information. So even though it may take a couple split seconds for that information to come back, it's not going to be 100% accurate. Think of it this way. You're doing something on a remote machine, whether you're taking a snapshot of the running processes or something like that. Let's say you take that snapshot at the exact same time another process is starting another service. So it may be in the process of starting, right? And you snapped it just as it started or was starting. And so what you're going to get back is that service is stopped. But in reality, it was in the process of starting and it's going to start, right? So it's not real time. You're going to have somewhat of a delay, which could skew your results very minimal, but just know that it's going to be skewed just a hair. So before we get into the demo, here's some ways we're going to interact with the remote machines. We're going to enter a PS session. So what enter-pssession is, it's kind of like your SSH. It's interactive. It's one-on-one. So if you enter PS session, you're running all the commands on that machine and you're getting the instantaneous results. It doesn't have to serialize the results or anything like that. Just know it's a one-to-one connection. So if you had to remote to a machine and do the one thing that you need to do, you can do that. Some key things to remember from this slide is, by default, you can, it's Windows. Actually, I don't even know if that's a true statement anymore. Earlier, before 7, you cannot use the IP address for remoting. You always had to use the host name, and it had to be the real host name. However, through SSH remoting, I was able to use IP address with no problem. But there was a way around it. You could add the remote machine to your trusted host WinRM config file, and it would allow you to use IP for enter-pssession. Your execution policies still exist. I must have hid the slide. We did not talk about the execution policies, but know that whenever you get onto a machine, especially a Windows host machine, the execution policy is restricted, meaning it's not going to execute any PowerShell scripts. As a matter of fact, I don't even think you can execute it from the command line. I always set my execution policy to remote signed. So if I'm running a PowerShell script from a remote location, that particular script needs to be digitally signed before it'll run on my machine. You'll see if you've looked at any type of malware or anything, all the bad guys tend to put they always end up putting set execution policy to bypass. That means it's just going to bypass all the execution policy altogether. So just know that whenever you remote into a machine, if you go to start doing something and it seems acting crazy, the execution policy may be set to restricted. So you may need to adjust that. So exit ps-session ends the session. So it closes the terminal and ends the session. So you want to avoid remote chains. So what it's talking about here is you can enter ps-session into your jump box, let's say. So your jump box is your admin box. You're doing all your stuff. Maybe it's your red teaming box where you've got all your red teaming tools, right? Or maybe it's your defensive box, whatever. You've got a remote admin machine that you do stuff on. So you're going to ps-session into there. You could actually enter ps-session into a second and third machine, right? But just know on your host machine, if you type in exit ps-session, it's going to close that first connection from you to your jump box. So, but your sessions from your jump box to wherever else are still there. So you'll have to get in there and kind of clean that up as well. Invoke-command. This is one that you could, it's a one-to-many remote PowerShell session. So basically what you're doing is you're invoking a command on a remote computer. And by default, you can talk to 20 or 32 computers at once. You can change that, but let's say it's only going to batch it in 32 computers at a time. So basically what happens is, say you have a list of 600 computers that you're going to get the processes from. So you invoke command, get process, all these computers, right? Well, your terminal is going to send out 32 requests. And as it gets those back, it's going to send out the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. So you can do 32 at a time. You can change that using the throttle command or the switch. So you'll see if you go out and do any type of research on how to use the invoke command, you're going to see some people use invoke command and they're going to use a tac command. Some people are going to use tac script block. Just know that they're both the same, right? One is actually the alias for the other. Either one's going to work, and I haven't had any issues out of it. So you can use, so to get your list of computer names and all that stuff, you could have a list of computers, like a text document, like I've gotten here, or you've seen in my examples where I was getting users. You can do the same thing for computers. If you know you've got a good database somewhere with the computer names, you can grab that, store it into a variable, and then use it. All right, so invoke command versus computer name. This is not that big of a deal anymore because computer name is actually starting to go away. You will see it in version 5, but I tried to use it in version 7 and I didn't see where we could use it. But just know that if you use TAC computer name, it's going to do it sequentially. So you're going to run this get service TAC computer name, and you're going to list out, let's say 3 computers. It's going to go get the service from the first computer, bring back the results, then go to the second one, bring back the results, go to the third one, then bring back the results. So it's doing it sequentially, one at a time. Whereas if you use invoke-command, it's going to send the request out to all 3 of them at once, and then just bring back the results as they come in. So this does not contain PS computer name property. So if you do the computer name, I think I've got an example of this. If you use the computer name, it's going to bring back all the results like in one list, but you're not going to know which process went to which computer. Whereas the invoke command, it's going to have another attribute there listed out for you, telling you which computer this particular process or service came from, or whatever it was, right? And computer name is done locally on your machine, meaning you've got to supply all the processing power for this command. Where invoke command, it runs it on the distant machine. So that's how you can get by with doing multiple computers at one time. The only positive thing I can say about it is that the computer, if you use the computer name parameter, it is live. It is not serialized. You don't have to deserialize it. And they're fully functional objects that you can do something with. So this is just going to say the opposite of what I said. PowerShell 7, or no, that was something we didn't talk about. Anyway, computers, so in the invoke command, they're, instead of sequentially, they're done in parallel. It's going to send it out to all 3 and then bring it back. It does contain the PS name. It's used over WinRM, so you can actually configure firewall rules and things like that. Whereas if you use the computer name parameter, each commandlet does it differently. So there's no one way to secure it, essentially. But with the invoke command, you know that it's going to be using certain ports, and so you can enable, you can open up those ports for the firewall. We talked about that. It's done on the distant machine. The downfall is they are serialized results, and they're limited in objects, meaning that they're not full objects. They do have some of the properties still left whenever they come back across. So let's just go ahead and get into the demo. Remoting demo. So we're going to open that one. We're going to open this one too. So let's do this one. Okay, we're gonna do that one in a minute. So here we go. Basically, we're gonna get some credentials. You can store your credentials in a variable, and it stores it as a secure string. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So now if I do $, creds, you see how I've got my username here. And then this is not my password, but it's stored as a secure string within memory. So yes, Mimikatz can probably pull it out of memory. So there's certain ways you can configure your WS management file. Here's some things you can look at. We're not going to do that. But you remember I said you want to make sure the to test to see if Windows clients are configured for remote management. They have this test WSMan commandlet. And we can see it doesn't appear to be turned on because here's, I'll show you here in a second. So some things I want to point out here. There's a few different ways to enable remote management on a Windows machine. You can do the get PS session configuration. Let's see, what's that do? I generally don't mess with this one. So it didn't do anything. So a lot of documentation is going to show you to do the WinRM quick config, which is the way I used to do it consistently to enable WinRM, because it configures your WinRM config file, it configures your firewall rules and things like that. However, when I was at the red teaming event about a year or so ago, I told the range, hey, I need you to enable PowerShell remoting on all my client computers or on the client computers. And the blue team that was there was saying the same thing. And the range kept saying, we did, we did, we did. What I found out was the way the range was built, each client machine had 2 NIC cards in it. It had one for the range as we're in there playing or whatever. Okay, so it had one for the range, which was for the management side of the range. So, you know, Vagrant was probably using it, or Ansible, or however they were configuring the range. But then on the network side, on the game side, it had one where that network card was configured as a domain, which is fine because then all the domain firewall rules and everything worked. However, the range network card was configured as public. So what happens, especially with PowerShell remoting, is PowerShell remoting is going to look at the different firewall rules that are enabled. It's seen that public was enabled, so it's the most restrictive. So even though I said enable WinRM quick config, it did not, simply because the public was turned on, even though I was trying to enable it on the domain firewall rules. So that didn't work out. So what I come to find out, you can do this enable PS remoting, and then you skip your network profile check. So that'll enable it regardless. So that's what we're going to do here. At least for this instance, that's what we're going to do as it's enabling. So while that's doing that, another thing I wanted to point out is WinRM is only available on Windows. You cannot do these steps on Linux or Mac. So now that that's enabled, I'm going to save this. Okay, hang on. Let's just do this right quick. So now we're going to test it. Huh, interesting. So if we enter ps-session localhost, you see how it says localhost in front of my command? That means I'm on my remote machine, which in this case is my remote host. It brings me back. Now I can enter, if I believe this is That's what it is. All right, I was trying to make sure these are the same. So you may need to pass some credentials. If you need to, they got a credential flag or a parameter you can use. Since I already had my credential stored in memory, it just went ahead and did it. As you can see, I'm on my local machine remotely. I know that's kind of confusing, but let's exit out. Not there, here. Now, we're going to invoke command. This is where we're going to get the the security event logs. And we're only going to get the 4862. If I remember correctly, that is successful logon. And then you see this PS computer name parameter way over here. That means on localhost, I have a log. On my desktop, I have this log. So this is earlier whenever I mentioned that the computer name doesn't have a computer name parameter that comes back or a property that comes back. This is what I was talking about. The invoke command will. So now I could have piped this to a spreadsheet or to JSON or whatever and did something with it. So these are all my logs. So now what we could do is we could actually store our sessions inside variables, which is great because now we can start doing things with these variables or with these sessions. So if you wanted to copy files over, this is exactly what you would do. You would enter a PS session. Remember, a PS session is a one-to-one. So you could actually, inside your sessions variable, you could have as many computers in there as you wanted. But you can copy, you would copy a file from, let's say, your local host workstation to a session. And that session is actually the remote session of a different computer. I don't have any examples here of that, but these are different ways you can interact with the sessions. So now if I do sessions, you can see that I've got 2 sessions opened. I can close them, or I can disconnect from a session. I can remove a session. I can enter a PS session. If I just wanted to interact with one of these, I could grab this one here, which is the first one, my desktop, and just interact with the one. Let's see, I still have my session open. As you can see, it's still open. I can close one. It's in a PS session where I can grab a session by its name, which will be trying for that one. So now that I've got all these connections to my computer, I can actually do stuff with the remote computers. You can even go this way. You can store each computer name as a variable and then enter a new session this way. I guess if you wanted each session, each computer to have its own session, then you wanted to group certain computers together, you could do something similar to this. So now, this is how, once you also have your sessions established, you can invoke commands to them. So we're going to invoke this command. And as you see, we're using get sim instance. And when it comes back, we'll see that we have our PS computer name property. We have the different process names, the process ID, and then the parent process, right? Same thing here. That's just kind of a rehash. And earlier I was talking about configuring your WS management config file to allow trusted hosts. Here's the commands that you would do that. WS man, remember I said, is a PS provider that you can use and interact with it like it was a drive. So we can get our WS man trusted hosts. We don't have any trusted hosts, but you could set one here if you wanted. And that's to reset it. So G is another conversation. And then just, this is more ways you can interact with the PS session. I'll let you guys have these. You guys can download these and tinker with them, play with them. But what I really want to do before we go on break here is I want to configure our two machines to talk to each other over SSH, PowerShell Remoting. So the first thing we need to do is check to see if PowerShell is even available. PowerShell SSH PowerShell Remoting is even available on our Windows machine. And as we can see here, it is. Since those two are available, let's copy this, bring it over to our Linux machine, maybe. There we go. There we go, I got it. So here's our command. We're gonna enter. And we can see that it has these two things. So SSH is available. PowerShell Remoting over SSH is available. So the next thing I have in the notes, we should be seeing those. So we got to configure our Windows machine. So we're going to check to see if OpenSSH is even installed. So let's go ahead and run that. So we see that the client is installed, but the server is not present. So what we have to do is we have to actually install and start the client, the server. So we have this Windows capability we have to add. And it does have to have these squiggly lines. I tried to do it without it, and it failed on me the other day. So let's go ahead and start that. All right, while that's doing that, let's save some time and get down here to the Linux config. So all we really need to do is, I think this is already installed. So let's copy that. Exit out of PowerShell. And then go yum install SSH. So yeah, it seems that was already installed. So now all we have to do on the Linux machine is we got to configure the SSHD config file. So what we're going to do is we're going to do SSH. And then there's going to be a spot somewhere for the password authentication. We need to change that to yes. Or actually, I think we have to. Uh-oh. You know what I did? So what I didn't do is I didn't actually grab the file. Here we go. Somewhere down here, ciphers, it's down toward the bottom. So here we go, the authentication, public key, password authentication. We need to uncomment that. And then down here at the very bottom, hang on, maybe it's not the bottom, if I remember correctly. Subsystem. It could probably be anywhere, but I thought I found it somewhere else. All right, we're going to put it at the very bottom. We're going to take this whole command right here, copy that, right there. So basically, we're saying, hey, whenever we SSH or whenever we remote PowerShell, we're going to use the PowerShell subsystem, and the binary is actually located at user bin pwsh. We're going to use SSHS. Not 100% sure what that stands for, but we don't want a logo either. So now we're going to right quit that, and now we can sudo I think is restart and that should fix that. Now we can come back up here. That should be installed. Let's see if this is working now. Yep, they're both installed. So now that means we can SSH from and to our Windows machine, is what that's saying. So now we want to set our service type, SSD service to automatic. Set our agent to automatic. Start our SSH agent. And start our SSHD service. Yep, so it started. So now we can get our SSH rules. Let's see what those look like. All right. So, Alt-E. All right, so now we got to set our firewall rule to allow SSH. All right. Now we need to edit this file. So what we can do here is we can go $env program data SSH. We want the SSH config. That should open up our notepad for us. And we're going to do the same thing we did on the Linux machine. We're going to uncomment out the password authentication. And then at the very bottom, we're going to add this subsystem comment. Hit enter, hit Control-V, file save. So that's done. Let's go ahead and restart our SSH services. All right. So I can't do the server, so that means I can't SSH out. So let's do this. Let's do, oh, one thing I wanted to point out, I'll work on this SSH server thing over break, but when you're putting in this statement here for the Windows machine, you have to use the 8.3 short names because of the program files has a space in it. So this config file is not going to like that space. So you have to use the 8. What they call the 8.3 short names, and you can figure out what those are. You can figure out what the short name for the programs file is by using this command line and then piping it to the 8.3 property, and that'll get you that right there. So you can just copy it. So now that that's done, let's see. I can let's do this. UWSH enter-pssession. All right. That's kind of hung up.